Welcome to Unit 3, Art as Cultural Heritage, Lesson 20, Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. The explorers who first set foot on the soil of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas wrongly judged the people they encountered by their Western standards. Today we are able to recognize the cultural contributions that these very cultures have provided. Lesson 20 allows us to cross the waters from Africa to Oceania and the Americas to see a clearer world view of these cultures and their contributions to art. The objectives for this lesson are to describe art's integral role in the daily activities of native cultures in Africa, Oceania, and the Americas. Recognize the variety of material styles and cultural purposes that characterize traditional African art. Compare ways that art serves a commemorative function in society. Analyze the range of visual characteristics and meaning found in oceanic art. Examine the continuation of artistic traditions in native North American cultures, and discuss art tracing historical development in Central and South America. The topics we'll be covering: Africa, Oceania, and Australia, native North America, and pre-Columbian Central and South America. The first area we will be covering is Africa. So far we've mostly talked about Africa in the context of Egyptian art and a little bit under the Islamic tradition. In this lesson we will be concentrating mostly on sub-Saharan Africa. We will be looking at some heads and masks over the next several slides. The reason why these are made will vary from culture to culture. For example, some masks are used in ritual activities. Some of the heads we will be looking at either were made for an ancestral figure, possibly a noble person or a king or a queen of a village or tribe, or maybe a head such as this from the Nok culture in Nigeria, possibly were attached to larger torsos which have broken over time. The Nok culture existed in Nigeria from between 500 BCE and 200 CE. Not much has survived of the Nok culture. There are several hundreds of these heads around, but they worked with perishable materials a lot, such as textiles and wood, and there's little information about them. We do know that they were working around the same time that the Greeks and Romans of ancient times were. This male portrait head comes from the sacred Yoruba city of Ife in Nigeria. This was made in the 13th century. This is a much more naturalistic approach to sculpture than we saw with the previous Nok head. The sculptors were very skilled with bronze, and they also made most of this sculpture for the royal court. If you look at the holes around the face area, there was probably a beaded veil that was on here at one time. Since the veil would have been made of textiles, it most likely deteriorated and the beads fell off. This is a bronze head from Benin, which was made around 1550. This falls stylistically, even though it was made afterwards, between the Nok head and the male portrait head of the Ife court, meaning that it bears some type of naturalistic stylization, but there's also some abstraction, as you can see in areas like the nose and the eyes. Bronze work in Benin was reserved exclusively for the king, which is known in Benin as Oba. This is another sculpture from the court of Benin in Nigeria, Africa. It is a pendant mask, which is from the early 16th century. A pendant means also that this could have been worn around the neck of somebody. This is a portrait of the Queen Mother. If you look at the outer rim of the upper and lower parts of the mask, there are little sculpted versions of Portuguese traders that were around at the time, and varied with portraits of salamanders, which in the Benin culture represented immortality. This slide is of some of the Bamana people of Mali, Africa. They are Taiwara dancers. This is full masking and garb for a ritual dance that would deal with something harvest related. The Taiwara are mythical people that taught the ancestors how to cultivate crops. If you look closely at the masks up on top of the head, many masks are actually worn on top and not on the front of the face, and there's some type of costuming that somehow masks the rest of the body as well. The mask on the left is a representation of a male, and the representation on the right is that of a female antelope. This slide is of a large dance headdress. It's from the Bamenda area of Cameroon, the grasslands, Africa, from around the 19th century. This is also a royal court sculpture, but it's much more abstracted than the other masks we've been looking at. If you look at the holes of the bottom of the masks, that's where any of the dressing would have gone on to cover up the dancer, and that would have rested on top of the head of the dancer. By this point in time, you will see two different types of masks coming out of Africa, in the sense that there are versions like this that are made for the royal court, and then by this point there are masks being made for export. Masks like this were in museums at the time when Pablo Picasso was young and coming up with his early ideas for art. Many of these African masks heavily influenced the Cubist movement. This sculpture is a tribal house post from Yoruba, Nigeria. It is by Olembe Alaye from the mid-20th century. A house post serves two functions. It provides structural support for the tribal house that it was made for, and it provides spiritual support. The figures that you see in here are actually ancestral figures from the tribe. The figure on top is the tribe elder. The figure in the middle is a woman holding a baby, and the figure on the bottom is a woman holding her breasts, which is a gesture of welcome. The figure in the middle represents nurturing, and the figure on top represents wisdom, all foundations of a stable village. The house post we just looked at is actually from this place. It's the tomb of former Chief Lisa in Ondo, Nigeria. You can actually see the house post up front. Chief Lisa was considered the pillar for stability in the community, so these columns, the house posts, take on a very metaphorical and symbolic sensibility. This is a sculpture from the Congo. It is a mangaka power figure, Nkondi Tatu oath-talking figure, to be more specific, from the 19th century. Power figures had more real-life applications in African tribal life, meaning that they didn't only apply to the royal court. More common folk could have these in their possession. Power figures were reserved to promote some type of positive outcome to an event, be it something like a harvest or something like a dispute, in which this figure actually was used for settling disputes. If an agreement was made between tribal figures, a power figure such as this was presented, and each of the members of that particular tribal area would have hammered a nail into it to symbolize, it's like their signature as a part of an agreement. All parties involved would actually hammer a nail in. The next area covered in this lesson is Oceania and Australia. This slide is a map of Oceania and Australia. So Oceania includes New Zealand, Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia, as well as the outer islands, all the way over to Easter Island and Hawaii. This is a protective prow figure from a war canoe from New Georgia Island in the Solomon Islands from around the 19th century. This would have been located at the front of a canoe to offer protection to the occupants inside. If you look at all the art from all of the surrounding islands, which can be spread thousands of miles apart, there are very similar iconography between all of the tribal cultures, particularly the bird and the decorations that you see on the face and in the ears. This sculpture is an abstraction of an animal-like figure, and it also serves a functional purpose. It is a coconut grater from the Caroline Islands from around 1954. If you look at the coloring of the grater, it has something that is called a patina. It's the natural process of oils and dirt embellishing the wood and giving it very individual characteristics. The person using this would have sat in the bowed center that would be the animal's back, and if you look on the front and the head area, you see a blade-like object. The coconut would have been placed there to remove the outer areas of it. This sculpture of a female figure is also from the Caroline Islands from around the 19th century. This is very similar in characteristics to the coconut grater. It has a very streamlined, abstracted figure, highly polished. This is a Moai figure from Easter Island from around 1000 to 1500. A lot of mystery surrounded Easter Island for years because these figures are located throughout many locations on the island. They are giant, and as with other locations such as the pyramids, it was always wondered how the people with no modern equipment handled moving these gigantic objects. These figures are protectors of the island. The ancestors of the Easter Islanders most likely came from the Polynesia area. If you look at the way the representations of the figures are in other art from Easter Island, there's strong similarities. The bird figure that I brought up before is also a big part of Easter Island iconography. Not much is known as to what happened to the original Easter Islanders. It is theorized that they died off due to overpopulation and lack of resources. For the most part, the people that were the original descendants of the islands eventually combined with the people of the European explorers that came in the 1700s, namely Captain Cook and his crew. We are now moving on to New Zealand. This is an example of a Maori meeting house. It's called Ruata Pupuke from 1881. Houses such as these were used for family gatherings and to honor the people's ancestors. The designs that you see along the edge of the roof line are very similar to the tattoo arts and textile arts of the Maori people. The representations of faces all over the front are representations of ancestors. This is a ridgepole from the Maori meeting house that we just looked at. This is actually what you would see if you were standing on the front porch looking directly above to the roof overhang. This offers support to the wood and thatch roof. This is also a representation of ancestors. The ancestors are believed to possess something called mana, which is a spiritual protective force, and these sculptures are an attempt to embody that force and offer protection to the people that are gathering inside. This is a bark painting from the Bunia people of Australia. It is funerary rites and the spirit's pathway after death. The native peoples of Australia felt they were bonded to nature, so you're going to see a lot of animals and other natural things in their artistic representations. There's also something called the eternal dream time that these figures represent. A lot of these figures are actually transparent, and you don't see it in this particular image, but a lot of times the Dreamtime figures will have representations of what's inside of them, be it organs or other possibly decorative things, as you see in this particular image. We are now moving over to the Americas, and we will start with native North America. When we think about the native peoples of North America, the most common image that will pop up would be that was portrayed in movies and television, the American Indian, and also what was seen in books. The history of Native American peoples goes back many thousands of years, back to the Hopewell Indians. Not much is known about them, also because they used a lot of perishable materials, namely wood and textiles possibly. Nothing's really left behind by them, other than some small artifacts and burial mounds, which we will be looking at next. This is an example of something similar to the burial mounds I just mentioned from the Hopewell Indians. It is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio from the Adena culture from around 1070. Not much is known about this particular piece other than the head and mouth of the serpent point at the sunset of every summer solstice. The original design of this, made by the builders, was started off by laying out some rocks to form the design, and then it was eventually filled with dirt mounding afterwards. Part of my early life, I grew up out in Phoenix and Scottsdale, Arizona. I saw many of these in my experience out there. I actually went to Hopi Elementary School, and this is an example of a Hopi Kachina doll, a Humus Katsina figure from around 1971 by Marshall Lomakima. These dolls are representations of male figures in the tribe that dance in these costumes, performing certain ritual dances. They also provide humor for the culture and also some public scoldings with a little bit of humor as well. These dolls are made by Hopi fathers and uncles to hand down to their children to teach them the sacred traditions of the Hopi. We are now moving down south to cover pre-Columbian Central and South American art. The first culture we'll be looking at are the Aztecs. This is an example of art from the Aztecs. It's a vessel of the feathered serpent from 1450 to 1521. The Aztecs were known for having bloody human sacrifices. Those sacrifices were meant to appease the feathered serpent that we see here in this image. The Aztecs also believed in the cyclical nature of things, as many of the cultures down in South and Central America did. The sacrifice to the feathered serpent is supposed to ensure the continuation of the world in Aztec beliefs. This vessel was actually meant to contain some of the elements of the sacrificial offerings, be it blood or body components from animals or people. The Aztecs didn't spend all of their lives just sacrificing humans. They also had highly developed forms of arts, such as poetry and literature. This slide is of Machu Picchu, the remote mountaintop location of the Inca in Peru from the 16th century. The Incas were very skilled at working with gold, but they were mostly known for their masonry, their skillful shaping and fitting of stones. This city is so high up in the mountains that it completely avoided detection by the Spanish during their conquest of South America. This is the last slide of our lesson. It is an aerial view of a hummingbird design in the Nazca Valley in Peru. These drawings in the land, so to say, can be massive. Sometimes lines go up to 5 miles long. They were made by the Nazca people. This isn't the only design. There are many spirals, trapezoids, triangles, and other abstracted images that are also located in the Nazca Valley. These had gone unnoticed in this view until the advent of airplanes and them being able to fly over and photograph and see these areas for the first time.